And I want to tell you that's important because that's the thing that links us to the community that struggles the most at this time. And I mean our Native American comrades who live here. They never really left, you know. We just overwhelmed their culture, but they still live here. Just over our river and through what were once actual woods, there is a park now over there by the Ford Museum. And you've been there, the Anabawen Park. For those who don't know, it was crafted along the river and has bumpy things that were put there. They are to replicate or at least remind us of mounds that were there when the Europeans first noticed them. And these mounds were demolished in order to make room for the industries that used the river. But those were really important places for the people who lived here before. They were burial places, and in fact, there are a few still left. I'm sure some of you have seen them if you go downriver. Well, the easiest way is you get on Market Street and go right to the very end, and there's a don't enter sign because it's one way. But if you did enter, you'd find yourself in remaining burial mounds of the peoples who lived here long ago and still do. And I'm pointing this out because they didn't arrive here on ancient days, but at least 1,000 years ago, part of a vast migration of the Anishinaabe people that I've talked about in the last week or two. And their descendants find Thanksgiving to be a bittersweet at best occasion because what are they being thankful for? Their culture. Remember, this is happy, we took your land and killed your people day in their world. And yet, their tradition has apart and separate and distinct from us something that happens at the same time of year now called the Ghost Supper. Have you heard of Ghost Suppers? I bet you some of you have. They're like the Mexican Day of the Dead experience. Families will get together and create a festive meal and invite the neighbors in, and what they will cook will be the foods that their ancestors ate. And you're supposed to show up, pay your respects at the home, and get a plate with each of the little foods on them, because it's understood that each guest represents the spirit of one of the ancestors come to call. Now, a long time ago, they didn't do that. They actually went to the cemeteries, to the mounds. And they didn't just stand there at the mounds. In very ancient times, they literally would open up the graves and look at the bones and give the food to the bones. And I know that sounds kind of creepy to you, but this sense of connecting with the ancestors, of remembering them, is exactly what we do when we talk about Grandma and Grandpa and how they used to eat with their mouth open. It's exactly the same thing. We may not be doing it at the cemetery, but it's exactly the same connection that they are having at the Ghost Supper that we're having at Thanksgiving. I know it sounds odd to think that we're all communing with the dead, but it goes on everywhere, not just the Anishinaabe, not just us at Thanksgiving. I love this story of St. Augustine's mother. She's St. Monica, for which that town in California is named Santa Monica. Well, Monica loved the communion of saints. Have you heard that phrase, the communion of saints? And she meant it. She meant it. She would take a basket of food, maybe a little wine, and she'd go to the Christian cemeteries and she'd have a little picnic with all the dead saints. Of course, she was the only one who did the eating, or the drinking for that matter. But the point was, it was important to her to go and celebrate the lives and deaths of the saints, and she would literally go to the cemeteries. If you go to ancient Rome and Greece and other places around the Mediterranean, you will discover that their most ancient religion is the veneration of ancestors, and you venerate them by lighting a fire and bringing them food. What I'm trying to tell you is, whether it's Thanksgiving or Ghost Suppers or you're off in the ancient Mediterranean, the idea that we commune with the ancestors is everywhere. It's ancient, it's powerful, and it's good. And it sounds odd, but I think we here in this liberal church need more communion of saints. I know that sounds very far from our liberal, skeptical, dubious ways, but I think this is our loss. Anybody here get here without ancestors? Who of us does not wish to be an ancestor? After all, we shall be, and we will be ancestors a lot longer than we will ever be alive. The Christian ritual says that we should commune with the saints because they give us a good example. intervene for us in heaven. But the world we inhabit, the bodies we have, everything around us came from our ancestors, every last bit of it. I didn't build this building, neither did you, or fashion these seats, or even come up with the idea of Fountain Street Church. Our ancestors did, spiritual or personal. We know they all sat here. And when they didn't sit here, they sat in the building that sat here. Layer upon layer of ancestors who have been part of our lives by choice or by accident. We are here because they were here. And now let's push that a little further into the communion notion. Because what happens when people die? We put them into the earth. A long time ago, when my eldest was 4 years old, in March, in New England, where we lived at the time, our hamster died. I may have told you this story. I forgive you. Forgive me if you've heard it before. And we decided, my wife and I, that we would bury the hamster as a good education in death and dying for a 4-year-old. We were also going to plant peas that day because death, life, it was a time to plant peas. So it wouldn't be an entirely grim experience. And I've got to tell you, at the end of winter in New England, it's like the end of winter here in Michigan. It takes a long time for it to go. So we dug holes to plant the peas after we buried the hamster. And then we went back inside. And a day or two later, I said to my 4-year-old son, "Come along, Aaron, it's time to water the peas." And so we went outside and we watered the peas. And I explained how the water would help the peas grow and we would have plants and we could eat the peas. And then he looked up at me and said, "Dad, can we water Fifi too?" And at just that moment, I realized why we bury the dead, hoping they will grow back. Because the earth is life. And so when we give our dead back to the earth, we are hoping in some odd way they will grow back. But the reality is that we go back to become the earth, don't we? And so every plant we eat of our own gardens or even from the Meyer store was grown in a place that was fertilized by the bones of an ancestor. We know this. In fact, the only dirt worth planting in is the decayed bodies of other creatures, plants, and animals alike. Do you see where I'm trying to say? Every time we eat, we commune with the saints. Our lives rise up from the dead the way plants grow up from the soil itself. And that's why we have Thanksgiving. That's why there are ghost suppers. That's why there are temples and histories and feasts of all kinds. The great irony is that the holiday that here in America divides the European from the Native American is about the same thing. This is the skeleton at the feast, the ghost that haunts us and whom we need to haunt us if we are to be fully human and fully alive. So this Thursday, as you prepare to eat, and I know you'll have to prepare all day, I want you to ponder the food as coming from the soil, and the soil is being made up of the dead, and how everything that gives us life comes from that place that was alive once. Make things that you will eat that remind you of the land, of the dirt, of the people who made you possible. And feel the fact that you depend completely, utterly on all these people who have already been and gone, who gave not only us life in our bodies, but give us life today in our food. And ask, perhaps just for a moment, call it grace, whatever you want to call it, how you will best be the food for generations to come.